record this too, in case people want to do that. Okay, so this is cadaver number 1, and I'm going to do a little bit about the lymph system and a little bit about tissues today. So one of the things you can do on this is cut the table into 2 monitors. So I have him on the top, cadaver number 1, and if I touch his skin, it'll show a picture, histology picture of the skin. And the orange part there is the outer layer of the skin, the epidermis, and it is stratified squamous epithelial. Remember, there's 4 tissue types: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. And epithelial always lines hollow organs and tubes. So on one side of epithelial tissue, there's a space. And the skin, of course, the space is the outside of the person. So the white part here is the space, or inside the body, the spaces are called lumens, but this is the outside. And then the cells are dead until you get all the way down to where it meets that bluish tissue. And that is the dermis, this next layer of the skin, which in AMP1 you guys are doing tissues and skin this week, 2 short little goals. And underneath, or in the dermis, or underneath epithelial tissue is almost always connective tissue, because connective tissue holds things together. It connects things, and it's connecting the epidermis, that outer layer of cells, to the underlying tissues, to the bones and the muscles and whatever. So this blue tissue is loose connective tissue, and the orange is the simple or the stratified squamous. Stratified means more than 1 layer, and simple means 1 layer. And there's many layers of skin, because as you know, you can brush against something or scratch yourself and not get blood. You're just scratching the outer layers of your epidermis, which is good. And the outer layer is dead, which is even better, because you can't hurt something that's already dead. So any bacteria or viruses or anything else that might be on the surface of your skin, it doesn't really hurt you. And it falls off or brushes off or washes off when you take a shower. And until you poke a hole all the way through that, into that connective tissue, it's relatively harmless. Okay, so if we take off a layer, or another thing you can also do is you can click to some different images. Here's another picture of skin, the dark pink layer kind of on the outside next to the white, again, is the epidermis. I don't think it tells you anything necessarily on here. It's just a magnification of the skin. Here's another one with some labels. You can see some of the different structures inside the skin a little bit closer. Anyway, these are some different images of skin. If we take him down a little bit, okay, so now we're seeing the muscle layers. If you click on a muscle, okay, that's the rectus femoris muscle there on the cadaver. It's one of the quads, okay? But on the right side of the screen, you can see skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is one of 3 types of muscle tissue in the human body. There's skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. Cardiac and smooth muscle are not voluntary. You don't control those. Cardiac muscle is only found in the heart, and smooth muscle is found in hollow organs and tubes, like your blood vessels, your stomach. Again, you don't control that. You put food in your stomach, it automatically moves as necessary to grind up that food. You don't have to tell it to turn on or turn off. But skeletal muscle, like what's shown here, is under voluntary control. It is also striated, which you can't see real well with this one. So if I click onto this one, you can see this one a little bit better. Okay, I think somebody just dinged to get in. I wonder if they needed to be invited. Yep, Nicole is waiting to get in. Okay, there we go. All right, so you can see the very faint little perpendicular lines. The muscle fibers in this are going from left to right across your screen. Okay, and the striations go up and down. So if I can enlarge this a little bit, maybe, you can see the little tiny lines. And when you get to the muscle chapter, we'll talk about those striations, our Z-line to Z-line and a sarcomere. Anyway, skeletal muscle is striated. It also is multinucleated. And I think this one shows it a little bit. The little purple oblong things here are the nuclei. There's more than one nuclei in a muscle fiber. Muscle fiber is a cell, okay, and it can be quite long, the whole length of the muscle. So they're long tube-like cells. They're not like perfectly round like a typical cell. And they have multiple nuclei. Okay? So they're voluntary, they're striated, and they have multiple nuclei. If I click on the connective tissue muscle here, see if I can get the
external ugly
aponeurosis. Let's remove that.
Internal oblique muscle.
Internal oblique, remove that.
Rectus abdominis muscle.
Rectus abdominis.
External
Let's see if we can get to some connective tissue here or some
internal
tendon.
Oblique muscle. Rectus
Let's
abdominis
do the
muscle.
tendon. Nope.
Ilium.
How about this? Well, ilium is a bone, and now you can see on the picture, the histology picture, that is bone tissue. Bone is also a type of connective tissue. When it comes to connective tissue, it ranges all the way from plasma to bone. So from a liquid to a solid, with cartilage and other types of connective tissue kind of in between. Connective tissue is defined by the matrix. The matrix is what the fibroblasts secrete, and it is made up of fibers like collagen and elastin. In bone, the matrix is secreted, it's collagen, and it gets mineralized with calcium and other minerals, which hardens. So you get basically hard bones. And their bone is laid down in layers called lamella. So that round circle in the middle, that white circle, is the central canal where a blood vessel would be, and the kind of goldish brown layers around it are the lamella. Each one of those circular units is called an osteon. And so if I get my pen tool here, this right here is one osteon, and this right here is one osteon. Okay, and there's several of them in this picture. So the central canal is the blood vessel in the middle. The layers are lamella. The little dark spots are cells inside spaces called lacuna. And because this is bone tissue, the cells inside are osteocytes. If it was cartilage, it would be chondrocytes. If it was fat, it would be adipocytes. Anyway, the osteocytes are in those little spaces called lacuna, and there's little tiny canals connecting each lacuna back to that central canal, because you got to get blood all the way to those osteocytes in order to keep them alive. Okay? Those little tiny canals are called cannuliculi, which is a cool word to say. Sounds like can you lick your eye? But the cannuliculi connect the lacuna to the central canal. Now, you can't get the osteon too big because then it gets too far away from that central canal, which is why there's several in this picture. Here's another one. Another picture, and it's showing the L there is lacuna, and the M is the matrix. So with that, there's another picture of a couple more osteons. Kind of a different aspect there. With that, there's another one up close osteon. You can just see the outside edges of it. most of that picture, that big white part is the central canal. Okay, so let's do a tendon here.
Second,
See if
metacarpal.
I can click on a tendon.
Extensor, retinaculum.
Tendons are made out of dense connective tissue. That's what's shown in this picture. Dense connective tissue is basically the collagen and elastin fibers are kind of lined up in an organized fashion, and it is very strong, but not solid. Tendons attach bones to muscles, and ligaments attach bones to bones, and they're both made out of dense connective tissue. Okay, so not something you necessarily want to eat, but every once in a while you come across one in a piece of meat, maybe when you're cutting it up and you cut around that part. But again, it's used to hold our muscles to bones or ligaments, bones to bones. And dense connective tissue is one of the types of connective tissue. Loose connective tissue, the fibers aren't lined up quite as tightly, is what connects what holds our skin to the muscles underneath. So dense is much stronger. Okay, so if we take off a little bit more of this guy, okay, and we're going to get down to his gut organs a little bit more. The greater omentum.
Greater omentum.
Okay, the greater omentum is a layer of fat that is kind of over our organs and holds them together. You've probably heard me talk about that before. And so this picture, the histology picture, is adipocytes, which is fat cells. And each white circle there is a cell filled with fat. It is also a type of connective tissue. If we take away the greater omentum, okay, and you can see the intestines here. If I
Mesentery.
click on the intestines,
Transverse colon.
there's the colon. The colon, the white part on the outside there, is the lumen because the colon is lined with epithelial tissue. And the type of epithelial tissue, you kind of see that it's kind of, it's like little projections. See if I can blow this up. How about this picture? Here we go. Each one of these white circles in the very middle, I'm going to get my pen tool out again so I can show that. So here's a white circle. Kind of color that yellow with my pen. Do you see that? I can't make this bigger. It's surrounded by cells that are secreting mucus. Glands are always made out of epithelial tissue. Now here, where the white is the intestine. So what would be in that space, and remember the space and epithelial tissue on one side is called the lumen. This space is going to hold poop because we're in the colon, right? So it's not like the lumen necessarily is empty space. But you can see the cells that my arrow is pointing to are columnar. They're column shaped. But there's also these white cells, whitish round cells. Those are called goblet cells, and goblet cells also secrete mucus. And that's pretty much the only secretion of the large intestine is mucus. It helps keep everything nice and slippery and slimy, and so things move along. Underneath on the other side of the columnar cells, down here, it's attached to the underlying connective tissue by what's called a basement membrane or the basal lamina. Epithelial tissue always has a lumen on one side and a basal lamina or the basement membrane on the other to attach it to the connective tissue. This is simple columnar. There's only one layer of columnar cells. Simple means one layer. Stratified is more than one layer. And this is simple columnar here. All right, if we go up to the stomach, well, let me clear my,
Stomach.
go up to the stomach here.
Round
Here's the
ligament.
stomach. Well,
Stomach.
There we go. Again, the stomach is going to be lined with epithelial tissue. This tissue is very specialized because not only is it epithelial tissue, but the lumen contains food and a lot of gastric juice, which is very acidic. So it's specialized epithelial that can withstand that acid content. But again, the white space is the lumen. You can see there's uh, the lighter pink cells, and then the darker pink is the basement membrane underneath, and then down here, blood vessels and connective tissue and that kind of stuff. And then even lower, you can see some smooth muscle. Here's another picture. You can see lots and lots of glandular cells here around each one of those white circles, and then down at the bottom of the picture is connective tissue, a smooth muscle layer that it looks like kind of a smiley face there. Smooth muscle, again, is involuntary. It's not striated, and there's only one nucleus per cell. If we go to the small intestine, do that for us here. Ditto.
Jejunum.
The jejunum, the small intestine, is lined with simple columnar epithelial. And again, each one of these projections up, there's white on either side, is called a villi. Simple columnar epithelial line them, and the whiter cells in there are goblet cells secreting mucus. There's also cilia a little bit. You can see on the surface it looks like a little tiny bit. Let me see if I can blow one up. Here's another one. Here you go. These are microvilli cells, they're called, and they're simple columnar epithelial. And in the middle is connective tissue holding blood vessels and lymph vessels. So the food is out in the white space, again called the lumen, and nutrients are being absorbed. And these goblet cells here, let me get my pen. You can see this goblet cell right here secretes mucus. There's always goblet cells embedded in the epithelial cells that line your intestinal tract. So there's lots and lots of mucus being produced. Here's another view of the villi and how much that increases the surface area of the small intestines. Okay, we go back to the cadaver for a minute. You can see that his spleen is huge, and this guy died of leukemia, and so the spleen is involved in the immune response, and his is definitely enlarged. Okay, let's clear this out here. See if we can get the spleen highlighted. The spleen is just massively swollen up in this guy, which isn't a big surprise because, again, he had leukemia. The spleen and the liver are both made up of reticular connective tissue, which forms kind of a scaffolding-like lattice made with connective tissue to hold the spleen cells or the liver cells in place. And I don't know if any of you have eaten liver, but liver is kind of chewy. It's because of that, the thin strands of collagen make up reticular fibers in the spleen and the liver. So the spleen and the liver, reticular connective tissue. That's kind of what it looks like there. The spleen, if I click on the liver, very similar. Okay. Typical brownish color because of the bilirubin produced during biosynthesis. And again, if you come back up and look at the cadaver picture, if I take away his mesentery, you can see even more how big the spleen is.
Spleen.
Maybe twice as big as, I color that, I'll color it yellow so you can really see it. Probably twice as big as what a normal spleen would be. Okay. A blood vessel, we click on a blood vessel here.
Radial veins.
There's a vein. Veins are, of course, tubes, so the inner lining of the vein, the top of the picture is the lumen where the blood would be, and then the lining of it is epithelial tissue, and then underneath that is connective tissue and some smooth muscle. Veins don't have as much smooth muscle as arteries do, but it does show three different types of um, tissues. Let me do an artery just so we can
Lateral
compare.
thoracic artery.
Okay, an artery, again, the white space in the middle there is where the blood would be, and then epithelial cells, and then this thick part where that kind of looks like there's a cut there almost, that thick part is smooth muscle. So a lot more muscle in the arteries because of the constriction and dilation that it's going to do to shunt blood flow. And then connective tissue on the outside here. Here's another really good picture of an artery. Okay, the epithelial is simple squamous epithelial in the middle, and then smooth muscle, and then connective tissue. Okay, so you can see all three there. Here they are enlarged, epithelial, some muscle, and connective tissue. Kind of cool. Here, this is the red lines there are the elastin fibers because arteries can stretch and relax depending on the pressure in that vessel. So that's a really good picture of connective tissue within an artery. All right, if we go up and we look at his lungs, that is another type of epithelial cell that lines the air sacs. These are simple squamous epithelial, so one layer, squamous in shape means kind of a star-shaped cell. Each white space there is an air sac, and each one is lined with a single layer of cells, simple squamous epithelial, so that the air, oxygen, and CO2 can diffuse across either way and into the blood vessels in between each air sac. So it's a really good picture of a lung. The larger structures in there are blood vessels, or some of the pulmonary arteries and veins. But air is exchanged only at the alveoli, the air sacs. All right, so I think the only kind of tissue I haven't shown you is nervous tissue. So let's take this guy down a little bit more and see if we can click on a nerve or the spinal cord. Let's turn him over. See if we can get to the spinal cord. Or we'll have to go up and get the brain, huh? So let's take away the bones. Here we go. Click on a spinal cord. There's the spinal cord, cut right through. That circle in the middle is the central canal, filled with cerebrospinal fluid. And then there's gray matter and white matter. And it's actually opposite colored because the white matter is on the outside and the gray is what looks kind of like a butterfly there. That part, if you damage, doesn't generally heal. So that's a pretty good picture of a spinal cord. How about
Occipital
the
lobe.
brain? Yeah, there's a cerebral cortex. We need some neurons. I wonder if it'll
Occipital lobe.
show us a neuron anywhere.
Cerebellum.
Cerebellum. Not really showing us a neuron. What's this one? No, that's all neuroglial cells. So we need to see some nervous tissue. I don't know if it'll show us that. We need a nerve. So let's go to the nervous system and show us some spinal nerves. There we go. See if we can get one of those. Okay. Come on. Will it name one for us? Turn over. There we go. See if we can get a spinal.
Thoracic nerve root.
There's a thoracic nerve root. Okay, T10. They're numbered for whichever vertebra they come out of.
Esophagus.
Well, there's a good picture of smooth muscle of the esophagus. The esophagus, again, is a tube, so the lining is going to be epithelial, but there's also a lot of smooth muscle to move food down. The swallowing mechanism is going to activate peristalsis, or food moving down to the stomach. It's not letting me click on an individual nerve fiber. So let's see if I can get one. How about a plexus? We want all of this stuff. Right? All right. See what they show us when we click on the sciatic nerve. Just showing us a nerve track.
Inferior alveolar nerve.
There's another nerve.
Superior thyroid artery.
There's an artery. Okay, you can see the epithelial and then smooth muscle and then connective tissue.
Occipital
I
lobe.
guess we're not going to not just see neurons very well. I don't know if it'll do that or not. Let's cut this guy in half. Okay. See that? What kind of cut is that? You guys should know. Sagittal, right? A sagittal cut. All right, let's touch the corpus callosum. Don't have tissue for that. How about the thalamus? Not showing us.
Occipital lobe.
Lobe. Do that one. Oh, it's showing us some the head. That's kind of cool. See what this one is. This person had epilepsy. Interesting. I didn't know these pictures were here. I would still like to see nervous tissue for you guys.
Pons.
That's what the brainstem does. There's the pons. Okay, the pons is involved in the breathing mechanism.
Sphenoidal sinus mucosa.
The sinus cavity. Not letting us show very much. Thalamus.
Anterior cerebral artery.
Anterior cerebral artery. Yeah, I know what arteries look like.
Cerebellum.
I guess I'm not going to get to show you a neuron. The nervous tissue is made up of neurons and neuroglial cells. Neurons send impulses, and the neuroglial cells simply support neurons. And neurons have a cell body and then very long projections, axons and dendrites, one axon per neuron, and sometimes multiple dendrites. It can be one, but it can be many. Dendrites receive information and bring it towards the cell body, and axons send information away. But axons can be very long, like a meter long, so it's not like you can see the entire neuron always when you're looking in a microscope. Mostly, if you want to look at individual neurons, you have to look at the brain because they're going to be a lot smaller there because there's shorter distances, across your head or whatever. All right, so if we put this guy back together, okay, undo, and we give him back all his organ systems, and we turn him right side up, and we take away the histology part, so we can go back to him normal. There we go. Stretch him out, make him bigger. Okay. There we go. We're back to the general body position. Back down to nerves, blood vessels, and the gut organs. And again, if we take away his greater omentum and take away the mesentery, make sure we got his spleen back here. We want the lymphatic organs. His spleen again, colored in yellow. You can see how enlarged it is because of his leukemia. Okay, so that's a little bit about the tissues and the entire lymph system. The only organ you guys really need to know is the spleen. There's no anatomy for that. If you're in A&P2, this is the easiest anatomy goal all the way through the semester because there's really only the spleen. The lymph vessels and nodes are named for body regions rather than, it says they're on here, so let's give him back some of his lymph. And you can see some of the lymph vessels. If I get rid of cardiovascular, but I keep the lymph system, and I get rid of nervous, I want to see those. Let's color the lymph blue. Branches, lymph nodes, let's color those blue too. You can see just without removing his guts, all the blue lymph nodes, especially in his neck, in his groin area. And if you take away the gut area, the greater omentum, there's a lot in your gut area as well.
Mesentery.
And his are swollen up. So you can see all the lymph system there. Probably because of his leukemia, but this is why a doctor feels your neck. You can see how many lymph nodes are underneath your jaw there and in your neck area, more under your arm, called the axillary lymph nodes, and the groin area as well. If you take away
Jejunum,
the jejunum,
ilium,
and the ilium,
transverse
and
colon,
some of your other colon, again, tons of them in your abdominal cavity, catching all the bugs from your food and that type of thing. All right, do you guys have any questions?